So welcome back to everyone, to those of you who have been with us before. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen right now. I won't be sharing it the whole time because there's some other things I'd like to show you, but here we go. And you should all be seeing it now. So the genesis for this was really a couple of years ago when I dramatically changed the way I was gardening. And I decided that if I was someone who, I've been gardening for years, if I learned so much after years and decades of gardening, doing this, and maybe there were some lessons I could help pass along to others as well. For those of you who have been to classes with me before, I talk a lot about why we want to grow at home, whether it's from a seed starting perspective, why you want to be growing things from seed, or whether in this case, why we want to be having a vegetable garden at home or a flower garden at home at all. There's a couple of different arguments. So we could take for example, the waste argument. Half of all the produce that's produced in the United States is wasted and never makes it for its intended purpose, which is for us to be able to eat it. Whether it rots in the field, it spoils, or is not, doesn't make it onto the truck or on the way to the grocery store. Whether it gets to the grocery store and it's just not in saleable condition, or maybe it's sitting there on the shelf, but doesn't quite look good to you. It doesn't look like the ideal pepper or the ideal orange, and so you pass it by in favor of another one. Or it gets to gets home with you. You're going to make a great dinner, but you put it off for a couple of days, and then 3 weeks later, it's that brown sludge in the back of your crisper drawer that you have to clean out, and is rather disgusting that you have to throw out and say, well, there was a wasted opportunity. And it really is a wasted opportunity. It ends up costing us in the 9 figures for wasted money and wasted value on all that produce that we're wasting. So I could try and sell you on that argument. I could try and sell you on the environmental impact of it. When you buy blueberries in the store right now, those are probably blueberries from South America. Those blueberries carry a significant carbon footprint trying to get them all the way up here to the United States, for example. Trying with all just the transportation costs in bringing them here. And that's not the only example. Anything that you're buying in the US that's trucked out from California or for the Midwest is going to have a significant footprint as far as carbon footprint. And you simply don't have that when you're growing the food in your own backyard. The average family, and we studied this about 10 years ago, and we figured out that the average family spends about $6,700 a year on food. Only about a tenth of that, a little bit more than a tenth of that, is on fresh fruits and vegetables, which is maybe not the most nutritious way of going about it, but that's how we do it. There's a significant opportunity for you there to be cutting down on those costs, to be more environmentally conscious and do that at home. And if we're focusing in on the costs, I want to share this with you. 10 years ago, we looked at the households in the US. 30% of the households gardened at home. And of those households that were gardening at home, most of them spent on average of about $70 on their on gardening, whether that was on seed, whether that was on accoutrements for the garden, or maybe soil. When they did a study on the value of the produce that they were pulling out of their garden, they pulled out about $530 worth of produce out of their garden. Now, if you think about that in our area, the start of our growing season is really at the end of the last frost, and that happens anywhere from April 5th to the 15th. And then it runs for about 7 months until about the middle of November, when we have the first frost of the next season. So that's about 7 months. And in 7 months, they took that $70 of investment and turned it into $530. That's kind of a 7-fold plus increase on their investment, there's not an investment vehicle that I know out there on Wall Street that's going to give you that kind of investment. And it's not just about the money that you're getting out of it. It's about the better taste that you're getting out of those vegetables. It's about getting the freshness out of it. When vegetables are picked on in a farmer's field and put into the boxes to get to the store, they haven't fully ripened yet. They're counting on them to finish the ripening process on the way to the store. The problem is that not all of the vitamins, not all of the nutrients that are in those vegetables get a chance to fully mature and develop when they're picked, when they're not ripe yet. But you don't have that same problem when you pick them out of your garden. You can pick them out of your garden and you're getting the freshest vegetables. You're getting vegetables that you get to pick the taste on, not just what they chose to include in the store because it'd be in the most saleable condition. But you're getting to pick those vegetables that you're optimizing for the taste. Now, the good news is that's increasing right now. There are, in the 5-year span between 2008 to 2013, we saw an increase of about 40% in the number of people in the U.S. who are gardening at home, which is fantastic. Here's the bad news. We hit a pandemic last year, right? And I don't know how many of you guys were trying to get garden supplies come the end of March or the beginning of April, but it became a really tight market. Burpee has been in existence, just as an example, as a seed company for about 145 years. The largest sales period in their history was the month of March 2020, which is just phenomenal to me. You know, people are just really getting into the idea of gardening at home, whether it's the insecurity of not knowing whether that's going to be in the market, whether they don't want to go to the market, they want to limit their exposure, they just want to grow at home, or whether they're getting a little bit more health conscious now and thinking that they want to have something that's a little bit fresher and a little bit more that they can control. So that's it. That really it is nice. What that means for you and me, though, is that we've got competition for a limited resource here. It's not that we have limited number of seeds. We've got limited number of people who are packaging those seeds to send those out, and they have to deal with coronavirus restrictions too in their workplace so they can be safe. So their ability to get those things to us is rather limited, even as they have ramped up. Other seed producers, Renee's Gardens, had said that their throughput last year, their demands were about 6 times their normal rate, 6 times last year, and this year is looking to be on track with that. So what I would like to talk to you about is I'd like to talk to you about gardening in small spaces today, but I'd like to talk to you about it from a perspective of failure, right? Because we tend to learn more, or I tend to learn more from my mistakes than I do from my successes. If I had success, then I think, hey, I was great, I did everything right, and now I don't need to worry about that anymore. But in actuality, when you make mistakes, you tend to analyze that a little bit more and figure out what you can do better next time. So when I look at why gardens have failed for me or people that I know in the past, a lot of it has to do with, there's a bunch of different reasons. One is this time of year, while everything's getting ready, we're ready for spring to come, there's a lot of excitement right now. You want to have things growing in your yard. You just feel good about things coming up, so you want to put the effort in. By the time it's June and July and it's really hot outside, your interest in doing all of that stuff wanes. It's hard to go outside. It's hot out there. You sweat a lot. Maybe there are bugs out there and you're not that happy about that. And so your excitement wanes off, drains off as you get into the summer months. So how can we solve that? Trying to garden in poor soil and not knowing the content of your soil, maybe not knowing what the deficiencies are there and not getting a good crop because of that. Maybe it's always fighting with weeds, or you're not quite sure how much to water, whether it's too much or too little. You missed a week because you went away on vacation and now your whole garden's dead. Then it gets overgrown. It just gets to be too much work. That kind of goes into the first point. You start wrestling with disease or with pests, and it just becomes a big mess. So what I would like to show you is I'd like to show you some techniques that can help you solve all of these problems in a simple way. And when I give you solutions for these, or potential solutions for it, because my solutions aren't the only ones, they're just ones I found that work pretty well. I try and go with 3 rules for that. My priorities are, is it effective? Then is it simple? And then after that, is it low cost? And if I can solve all 3 of those, that's great. But those are in priority order for me. I can't do anything if it's not going to be effective out there. It doesn't make much sense. I can't do anything if it's going to be overly complex, because either I'm going to lose interest in doing it, or it's not going to be repeatable. And then if it's overly expensive, I don't know. I tend to be a little thrifty when I go through this. Most gardeners I know are the same way. So let's step through that a little bit. And this is kind of how I'm going to structure the talk today, so you can follow through it with me. Talk about some of these different concepts and talk to you about why I make the choices that I make in doing it. Intensive gardening techniques, gardening in small spaces, is not just about gardening in raised beds. Now, a lot of us will talk about raised beds, and I will too, but you can do this on your balcony of a condo or of an apartment. You can do it on a patio deck. You can use raised planters. The ones in the middle there are some vertical beds that I made that I have gardened in before. You can do it, and you can get inventive, whether it's pots, whether you can spend a lot of money on towers, but you don't have to get overly complex with this. A simple pot on your patio can give you the space to grow an appropriate varietal of vegetable that you want to be eating that year. And so we'll talk about a little bit how to do that. When I was growing up in Southern California, and I'm originally from Southern California, then I was in the Air Force, moved all around the world, and ended up here in Hampton Roads about 12 years ago now. But when I was growing up, my dad was a biologist, and he had a great garden in our backyard. And the way he gardened was the way that everyone gardened pretty much back then. We gardened the way that farmers garden in rows. And this works really, really well for farmers, because typically when farmers are going out and they're harvesting their crop, they want to harvest all of their crop at once. And rows are super efficient at that. They're trying to create larger volumes of product. So they're going to go through, be able to pick them all at once, moving down the row, and they're going to be fine with that. The problem with that for us in a smaller scale is that I don't want to be harvesting 20 pounds of peppers at a time, and or radishes or carrots or whatever it is. I probably go out there and I want to get a pepper or two to add to the salad for dinner, maybe some leaves of spinach or for a sandwich, or maybe I want to pick some tomatoes I can throw in with a salad or eat on their own if they're cherry tomatoes. Maybe the kids, I want to go out there with them and show how juicy it is to eat sugar snap peas, picking them straight off the vines, but I don't want to be picking a bushel or two of them at a time. And so when I start thinking about that, I start thinking about moving to a smaller space and using that more efficiently. And that's really what we're talking about intensive gardening techniques. It's about using the spaces that we have to do it in a more efficient manner and a more targeted manner. And that's really what I want to take you through. And it can take all sorts of different shapes and forms. So the first thing, and the easiest way I'm going to start off talking about this, is I'm going to talk about doing raised beds. Just remember what I said up front. It's not just all about raised beds. You can do it in pots. You can do it in vertical gardens. You can do it in a number of different ways. First thing you want to do is you want to build a box. Now, what do you use to build that box? You want to use things that are not going to be leaching things into the soil. So you don't want to use pressure-treated wood that was pressure-treated prior to 2001. What does that mean? If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or any big box stores right now and buy wood that's pressure-treated, that's not going to be pressure-treated with arsenic. It's going to be pressure-treated with salts. And because of that, it's safe for you to use in garden beds. But the older stuff would not be. So I'm not going to go out and just get a bunch of scrap lumber and use that because I don't know what it was painted with. I don't know what it was treated with. So I'm going to stay away from that stuff. But I'm a huge believer in pressure treated lumber because it lasts longer and it holds up well and it's not dangerous for my soil. And in fact, I really like landscape timbers, which you can find pretty easily. Those are super easy to put together, and I'll show you a couple of ways I've done that in the past. But I typically make my raised beds these days with pressure treated landscape timbers. They're about the size of a 4x4, slightly less than that. And I put them together with rebar, and it holds together really good. So I build that box, and I put some weed cloth down at the bottom, and that's to keep all those grasses from coming up from underneath, because they will do that. And then the next thing I do is I want to fill it with soil. Now, this is the most important part of gardening in small spaces. And big foot stomper on this. It's the same thing with building a foundation on a house. If you build the foundation on your house correctly up front and spend the money and the time to do that, you will be fine. Everything else that you build on that will be built on, it's a little trite, a solid foundation. It's the same way with your soil. If you take the time to get this right, everything else that you're going to be growing on it just sets you up for success. If not, you are always going to be fighting against that. And you look at some of the stuff that I recommend here, and you'll say, well, that might be the most expensive part of my garden. Because, for compost, I can get a yard of it. That's going to be, if I get it at the dump, it's going to be about $12. If I get the premium stuff at a nursery, some really good organic compost, that might be more like $36 a cubic yard. That's kind of expensive. And then I look at peat moss, and for a 3 square foot bale of that's going to be about $11-12 a bale, and a bag of vermiculite is going to cost about $30 for a 4 cubic feet of that. That ends up, and you start looking at that and you say, boy, that's expensive. And my response to you is that soil is going to last you in your garden for 10, 12, maybe 15 years. And it's still going to be good, and you're still going to be able to use it. So amortize that cost out, and it makes a lot more sense to do it that way. When I fill mine with soil, I don't go buy bags from the store. I do exactly what I was just talking about. I make it up of equal parts of compost, peat moss, and vermiculite. Now, why is that? The compost gives you the organic matter that your plants are going to use to grow. But if it's all compost, that will be too thick, and it will be too heavy, and your plants aren't going to grow very well in it. It won't retain water to the right amount, and your plants won't do very well. So you need to give your soil the ability to hold on to water when it rains, and to slow release that to your plants. That's where the peat moss comes in. Peat moss or cocoa fibers, if you want to be more organic about it. Peat moss is like sphagnum moss. It's not sphagnum moss. It's different than that, but it's very light and airy. When it comes in contact with water, it swells up like a sponge, and it holds that and slow releases that, which is really good for the roots of your plants. The vermiculite helps you keep air pockets in your soil, and also helps with that water retention. And most of us don't think about roots needing air, but they absolutely need air. In fact, if roots get waterlogged, they rot and they die. And that's why vermiculite, which is a small ground up, very light crushed rock, helps with that, has jagged edges. And if you have the choice with that, you want to get the coarse vermiculite. Peat moss, you can get at any of the big box stores that specialize in gardening. And vermiculite or perlite is an acceptable substitute for that. You pretty much need to go to a garden center to get that. Some of the smaller hardware stores around here will also carry that. And just not endorsing any businesses, but I know you can get it at places like Ken Matthews, Ace Hardware, Peninsula Hardwood Mulch, things like that. So you guys know where you can go to get that stuff. Certainly that's not an exhaustive list, but those are, Tractor Supply will carry that too. Lots of other places around here will do that. But those are the types of stores that you want to be going to get to find that. And then the next thing that you want to be doing is adding a grid, and that helps you manage your raised bed a little bit better. Now, when you build this box, you want to make it, the dimensions aren't really important, except for you don't want those dimensions to be any wider than 4 feet. Why is that? You never want to step into the soil. You don't want to make this soil compact. You always want to be reaching into that soil to be able to take care of your plants, to weed at the beginning, to harvest your produce out of here. And most of us can reach about 2 feet. So if you make the width of that any further than 4 feet, you're not going to be able to reach all the way into it. You can make it 8 foot by 4 feet. You can make it 16 feet by 4 feet. You can make it 16 feet by 2 feet. Just don't make it 16 feet by 6 feet. All right. And how deep do you make it? Lots of people ask this. Most of the plants, unless you're talking about root plants, most of the plants that we grow in our vegetable and flower gardens don't need more than about 6 inches of topsoil that they need to grow. So what does that mean? Can I just make it 6 inches? Well, you can. If you're not going to grow carrots or any root plants or beets or radishes or things along those lines, you could make it that, but then you'd have to fill it up right to the top. What do I do on my gardens? I make mine 12 inches tall. That way I can fill it up to about 9, 10 inches and I can grow my carrots in there. If I really want to grow a lot of carrots, I'll probably fill it all the way up to 12 inches, but I don't have to fill everything up to the rim and do that. It gives me a little bit of space to work with. You can do all sorts of neat things with it. So once you figure out that 4 feet is a magical component, you can make it a U shape where it makes it really easy to walk in and reach into all different parts of your garden. You can buy kits that help you make it, into a square 4 by 4. You can do all sorts of things to give your garden the character that you want to build. It really is up to you. You can see them using planks of 2 by 12s in here, like the top middle one. You can see where they use 4 by 4s on the bottom right and the different shapes. And it doesn't just have to be rectangular. Here are some beds that I made for a neighbor. A friend of mine is a beekeeper. I'm a beekeeper too. And she really wanted to have hexagonal beds because of honeycomb. And I thought, well, that's neat. How can we do this? It's really rather simple. All you have to do is cut at a different than a 90-degree angle, and you can make these. So you can give your beds all the character that they need to be growing. And in this case, we made 4 of them, and they did pretty well. And you ask, how well did they do? Well, they did this well. This is Jim, one of the friends I did this for, and you can see Jim's a pretty tall guy. He's about 6'2", 6'3", and you can see how well those vines are doing, those tomato vines are doing there in those beds. They are overgrowing the beds, okay? It really works well. This is the first year that they were growing out of that. So this is not after a couple of years of them doing it right. This is what they were able to achieve in their first year. So how do we do this, and how do we divide that up? Once you divide your bed up into squares, each square becomes a different opportunity to grow a different crop. Now, you don't have to. You can grow in a 4 by 4. You can grow 16 squares of all the same crop, but you don't have to. Remember what I was talking before about only needing to go out and buy 1 pepper, or get 1 pepper for your salad, or maybe 2, or maybe you want to be getting a couple of cucumbers for the salad too, but you want to be able to go out there and harvest what you need, and it's probably not in gigantic quantities. So you can mix that up. And how do you mix that up? Well, when you look on your seeds and you say, you see on the seed packet, it says spacing 12 inches between, it'll say plant them in rows 3 feet apart, so you have room to move between there and harvest them. So you don't need to worry about that. But then it says something like plant in rows 3 feet apart, 12-inch spacing between plants, or thin to 12-inch spacing. Great. I know that then that one of those plants will fit in one square of this, because each square is 12 inches by 12 inches. It'll have enough room. Maybe it says plant each seed 6 inches apart. Well, great. I know that 6 into 12 is 2, so I can plant in a grid of 2 by 2. If it says 4 inches apart, I know that they need to be, that 4 goes into 12 3 times, and I can plant in a grid of 3 by 3. Spinach is a good example of that. Or if it's only 3 inches apart or less, I can plant in a grid, 3 goes into 12 4 times. I can plant in a grid of 4 by 4, like carrots or scallions or radishes, things like that. So it really becomes quite simple to break this up and have variety even within the same square 4 by 4 or 4 by 8 that you're planting out. This is how I do it in my garden. This is part of my garden right here that I'm showing you, and I geek out a little bit, and I do it in Excel because, and I can look back and see what I did in past years. But I like being able to have that so I can learn from my mistakes. And what I do is I make the cells in Excel big enough that I can lay it out, and you can see blown up here on the left side of your screen is my pepper bed from that year. So it's a bed that I had primarily peppers and cucumbers in, and it's a 4 by 10 bed. It could be 4 by 4, 4 by 8, 4 by 10, as long as it's not wider than 4 feet. And then I break it out so I know what I'm planting in there. Now, I don't do this after I plant in there. I do this before I plant. I plan out my garden ahead of time, like right around now, so I know what I want to be growing during the season. And then I personally grow everything that I put in here from seed, but you could also go to the store and buy the starting packs, the pony packs in the store, and use those to plan out your garden. However you want to do it. I do it from seed because it gives me a wider variety, but I plan this out and then grow my plants as necessary. Now, I'm going to stop this for just a second, and I'm going to show you what I got right here, so you can see what I'm looking at. These are, if you were in my starting from seed class, this is one of my little greenhouse boxes that I used. These are some of my peppers that I've been growing. Some of them are doing quite well. I've labeled them. You can see right here across the front. I've got 3 rows of this mini bell pepper and then 3 other varieties of peppers right here. And they're growing up really nicely. These have been growing for about 4-ish weeks now and are doing pretty well. Peppers tend to need about 8 weeks prior to be put outside. But these are doing pretty well. But I don't start here. I start by coming up with a plan, knowing what I want to be planting, and then plant the seeds that I want to be working with. Let me go back to sharing my screen here. And
Nate.
Yes, did someone have a question?
Yeah, somebody just said, why the marigolds in the corner of the pepper garden?
Very good question. So I use companion planting a lot. Companion planting takes advantage of the fact that some plants have beneficial effects on other plants and grow a lot better when they're placed together with those plants, with those companion plants. Whether it's because they provide nutrients into the soil that the other plants want, or because they tend to dissuade pests. Marigolds are one of those wonderful plants that deters plants or pests like aphids, that deters mosquitoes, that deters a lot of different things. So I put marigolds in there to kind of keep the pests that I don't want in my garden away from my garden. Now, how do I know about those things? Well, you can Google them, but sometimes with Google you get things that are good and aren't good. This is one of the books that I can highly recommend. That is a really good one. Carrots Love Tomatoes talks a lot about companion planting. I use this every season to remind myself what things go together. So when I'm coming up with my plan, I've got a way to do it. So Carrots Love Tomatoes. It's written by Louise Riot, and quite a good book. I think we might have this at the library. I know we do have some books on companion planting at the library. But if not, this you can get this at bookstores, on online booksellers, and it really is a good resource that I can recommend. But let's go back to this. Share. Good. So anyway, enough about that. The idea is that I come up with a plan and then I do it. And if you notice on here, there are other little things I put on there to remind myself. For example, another example of companion planting is you'll see the notes just outside of the beds that says plant 2 to 3 radish seeds with each cucumber. Why do I do that? Because radishes are a way, and it's not foolproof, but it does cut down on it, deterring squash bugs. And squash bugs are the bane of my existence. I'm always I keep bees, like I said, so I don't use pesticides in my garden. So if I'm not using pesticides, I've got to find different ways to dissuade pests from entering my garden. And one of those key ways of doing that are companion planting. So radish seeds, growing radishes and letting them go to seed. That means starting to bloom there. I'm not going to harvest them. I'm just going to leave them there as a deterrent. Nasturtiums also work in that way. And then manual removal also works. So a lot of different examples of companion planting. This is what my garden looks like when I'm starting out. How it's laid out. You can see the grids that I've sent out there. You can use anything really to set out your grids. It's really helpful to have a visual representation. I'll talk about that more in a little bit, why that's so important. I like using plumber's string to lay it out. It's bright. It keeps its color even throughout the season. I use a staple gun to put it in place, and that lets me put in a really nice grid that doesn't get in my way in the same way that wooden slats would get in my way, or other techniques like that. So that's why I use the plumber's string. The PVC pipe that you see arched over there, there are times that I use my beds as cold frames. I can talk about that a little bit more later, but that's a way of extending my growing season on both the front and the back side. So this is what my garden looks like when it gets planted out. So I'll talk a little bit more about the trellises later. But you can see, for example, in the lower right, I've planted out my peppers there, and they're starting to take off. They're starting to grow. And I know that if I plant my peppers here and I have the grid lines, I plant my peppers right in the middle. So that means that if something's sprouting out and it's not in the middle of that square, it's a weed. I don't care what it is. It doesn't belong there and it comes out. So I don't have to be an expert in exactly what that plant looks like. If I know what I've planted in that square and I know it's not where I planted something, then it's a weed and it needs to come out. And that helps me out a lot at the beginning, where it's hard to tell the difference sometimes between a seedling that I want to have be there and a seedling that I don't want to have be there. And this shows you a little bit about the evolution of my garden. Before, I created kind of a set-aside area for my garden, and I was doing it in rows. That's in the upper right-hand side. And then the first year that I tried square foot gardening techniques or intensive gardening techniques, I used these wooden slats, and I tried to convert the area. And while it worked okay, it worked so much better when I had the dedicated beds, when I put those together. Now in this garden, I happen to use 2x12s as my as the sides for my raised beds, but I also use the landscape timbers in another area as well.
Nathan,
yes.
Can you tell us what kind of wood you used for that?
Sure. Just standard pressure treated 2x12s that I got at a big box store nearby that is the opposite of Highs. So not mentioning any names, so. And that's where I got them. Pressure treated wood. I did stain it, so it gave it a little bit of protection, extra protection. I didn't need to do that, but for these, I wanted it to look a little bit nicer. So if you care about economic value, these are in black. These are the what Virginia Tech will tell you are the best bang for your buck as far as value for growing at home. The ones in red are ones that people particularly like growing at home, but aren't necessarily the highest bang for the buck. But I'm not strictly doing this for an economic value. I'm certainly not doing this to sell at a farmer's market or anything like this. I'm growing things in my vegetable garden or in my flower garden for personal consumption. And so I'm growing what I want to grow, what I like eating, what I like looking at. And so, but if you're someone who's driven more by economic value, here's we've got lists like this, and these are all available through Virginia Tech. My next big thing for you is once you have organized your area, once you have organized it into raised beds, so you're using a concentrated area to be growing your stuff. There are a lot of things that tend to sprawl. Cucumbers will sprawl. Beans and peas, some kinds of them will sprawl. Tomatoes, indeterminate tomatoes, will sprawl. And so if you let them grow without any intervention, they're going to take over the whole area. And you really don't want that when you have a limited amount of space to be gardening in. So what you can do here is you create trellises and you go up, not out. Now, this does a couple of things for you. Number one, it saves your valuable real estate around there so you can grow other crops. Number two, it raises up the crops so you can see them more easily. It's a lot easier to find these sugar snap peas on the right since they're growing up at your eye level than having to hunt through the vines on the ground as you're stepping on them to try and find where your crop is. You know, whereas if they're growing up, you just look around a little bit and you can find them a lot easier. Same thing with tomatoes, same thing with cucumbers. It just works a lot easier. You can even do this, as I show you on the bottom left here, with small pumpkins. Okay, now small pumpkins, we're talking about, maybe certainly not a basketball size or anything like that, but ornamental gourds, birdhouse gourds, small pumpkins, that works great. I use conduit. I use 1/2-inch conduit. That I use a conduit bender to bend. You can feel almost like Superman. It's steel, so you're bending steel with your bare hands, and I bend it into shape. Conduit, a 10-foot length of 1/2-inch conduit will cost about $3.50 at a big box store. I buy a coupler for it, so I put two of them together. I cut it to the appropriate size because I only wanted 6 to 7 feet tall, because once it gets taller than 7 feet, I'm not getting up there. And then I use a nylon mesh netting. Now, what kind of netting do I use? Let me share that with you here. There's a couple of different products, and I'll help you out with that. These I have found to be very useful, and I'm going to share right here this vine and veggie trellis net that I get on a major online retailer. It's a 5 foot by 30 feet that works really well for about 6 of my trellises or so. And I use this. It's really easy to reach through. It's really easy it's not hard on my hands as I go up against it, and it lasts for several years. And all I do is I tie it to those, the frame structure that I've created out of the conduit, and then it works for quite a long time. And then the other thing is things like sugar snap peas and cucumbers will send out tendrils that will hold on to this netting and will naturally bind themselves up through it. But not everything will do that. For example, tomatoes don't have tendrils that they send out. So if I want those to vine and I want them to climb up, either I have to be out there purposely weaving them through it, or I can get something like this. So I'm going to stop sharing this for just a second so you can see this Velcro type ties. Now we're all or most of us have seen those plastic stretchy ties that you can tie your plants to stakes with. Those are okay until they've been outside and they get brittle, and then they're not stretchy anymore. So they really restrict the plant. And then there's all that plastic waste in your garden, and they're not reusable. You just have to cut them off and throw it away. I've used this piece of Velcro strap for I don't know, 2 or 3 seasons now. It still has a lot of Velcro in it. I can adjust it. I can move it around to new places that I need it, and then I can save it for the next season. Where do I get stuff like that? I can get those also on major online retailers like, and let me pull this right to here, like this, which is one of the times that I bought it. This is one of those products that I really enjoy. It's not the only manufacturer of it, and this isn't the only place to get it, but it sure does make it more convenient, and it's a great product. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my presentation. Let's see, right here. So I use that quite a bit on my garden and when I'm going up. And vertical gardening techniques like this really help not only with your labor, not only with being able to find all of your produce, but it also helps with disease and pest resistance as well. One of the problems that we have with mildews or different types of bacteria and fungal infections that we get around here is that if there's air movement around the leaves on your plants, you are much less likely to have fungal or bacterial infections with your plants. Well, when you bring them up, they're more exposed to air moving around them. So you don't have the same sorts of problems, or you have them a lot less. The other thing that it helps with is pests. It's really hard when you have a thick vine of squash on the ground and you're trying to look through it to see if you have squash bugs on it. You have to pick up every little bit of it and avoid stepping on the squash in different places or the cucumbers, and try and lift up every leaf to look under it to make sure that you don't have a pest problem. Well, when they're growing up a trellis, it's so much easier. And if you don't like the way that the conduit looks, you can do what Susan did in her garden. And not to call her out, but her husband is quite the artist, amateur artist, and he decided to take a lot of just use what he had in the yard, use twigs off of his river birch tree, and anyone who has a river birch knows that they just shed branches like anything, and he wound them around it, so you're not looking at the steel conduit, you're looking at the branches, and it makes it a little bit more attractive. I think it makes it a lot more attractive. I just don't have the time to do it, and he did, and I think it looks great. So I like highlighting that. So why do you want to do this, and why do you want to put? Earlier I said it helps you organize your garden a lot better. But if you notice, I put my my beds in my garden. I put them about 2.5 feet apart, and I will tell you after doing this that is too close. 3 feet is the maximum closeness that you want between your beds. 4 feet is even better. Why would you do that? Because you're giving up valuable real estate when you do that, right? Well, you do that because this is what your plants look like in April when you first put them in there, or maybe after growing for a little bit, right? This is what they look like in May as they're growing up and getting a little bit bigger. And this is what they look like in June. And it just keeps going. They go crazy. You don't have enough room to move through there if you plant them too close together. So you need room to move through your garden and be able to harvest. They're going to bush out. They all want their elbow room. You're trying to help them grow up, but you still need room to move through there as well. And really, this is what my garden looks like every year. I'm not using a miracle fertilizer. I'm not using anything different than what I'm talking to you about in this presentation right here. And this is the first year in the raised beds. Every year after it, it's looked like this, only more so. Only now my arbor has coral honeysuckle growing all over it, and I've got that going as well. So it really, you really get this every year, and it doesn't take a long time to do this. So let's talk a little bit about water, because water is an important thing with your beds. Your plants obviously all need water, but they need it in the right amount. They need about 1 inch per week. And you can do that by taking a little tuna can and putting that out in your garden and see how much rain it gets. Or you can put that out there, and when you're watering it, it comes out to about 60 gallons per 100 square feet. So the question is, how are you getting that to your plants? Well, if it rains, that's pretty easy. You know how much it rained and whether you need to supplement that a couple days after it rains. You can get it from local city water as well. You're of course paying for that, but it's not too much, and certainly you're getting more value out of your garden than the water that you're putting in. But you don't want to waste that resource. So when you're watering, you don't want the water to be going onto the leaves of the plants, because watering on the leaves of the plants encourages disease. You also want to be watering relatively early in the day before photosynthesis starts, letting those roots soak up the water, because remember, plants need that water in order to conduct the photosynthesis. So if they have time to absorb that into their tissues before they start having to use it, that's the best time to do it. Watering towards the end of the day encourages those plants to be wet going into the night, which is when fungi really have a field day and their best growing time. So you don't want to advantage the fungi at the disadvantage of your plants. So watering in the morning and watering deeply. Don't water, say, several times a day. Go for a deep watering rather than frequently all the time. And lots of our vegetables that we use really depend on this water and will not do well without it, like tomatoes and cucumbers. Lots of our vegetables do that. So how can you do this more successfully? One of the ways is put it on a timer. So you could go out there every day if you're really disciplined and you get up at a certain time and you're going to go out and you're going to hand water your garden and you're going to be around there every day to do that. You're not going to just get distracted by anything else. But if you're anything like me, I get distracted by other things and I have different projects that come up and maybe I can't get out there at exactly the same time every day. Or maybe I go on vacation and I need something taking care of that. So an easy way to do that is to put whatever system you come up with on a timer. You can use drip hose, or you can use soaker hoses. You can use that. That's not quite very precise, but you can use soaker hoses on a timer that's set to come on and run for a certain amount of time every day. That's one way of doing it. I like using drip irrigation quite a bit. If you look here at how my beds are laid out, I have my drip irrigation going out all throughout this, and it is linked in with my garden. With my landscape sprinklers, it's just on a separate zone, so it runs on its own. And I have variable emitters on each square, so I can tailor the amount of water going to each square based on what their watering needs are. And I can adjust that as it goes through the season. I might need to increase in one area and decrease on the other, and have the variable emitters. Well, that makes it easy for me. Now, does this cost something? Yeah, it costs something to put this in there, but amortized over the life of how long I'm using this. I put these in 5 years ago now. Minor repairs every year, but I'm getting quite a bit of use out of it. I've paid for this system already in the water savings that I have gained from using a system like this. It's really simple. You can buy these at big box stores. You can go online to do it. There's an online retailer that I like using because they have everything in stock. Typically, they send it out pretty quickly, and I know I can find everything through them, as opposed to going to a big box store and not finding everything there that I need. And and usually their associates are not as knowledgeable about drip irrigation. But if you go to a garden center or a nursery around here, they may be more knowledgeable about that. But drip irrigation is a great way to save water, to get the right amounts to the plants at the level that they need it, and to be able to tailor that the way that you need to. Let me go back and skip through this. So this goes into when to start. I talked about this a little bit in the seed starting course. If you were there, we are in most of our area here in York County and Poquoson, if you live around here, in zone 8A, which means we have our last spring frost from anywhere from April 15th to the April 5th. That's typical. That's an average. It's not every single year. Some years it's earlier, some years it's later. But I will tell you, even a lot of years when I've said, man, we're going to have our last frost at the end of March. We're not going to have any more, and I'm going to start planting it out. And all of a sudden, on April 13th, here comes a frost, and everything that I planted out there is about ready to die that night, unless I find a way, like a row cover, to protect it. So you got to be really careful about those last frost dates. But this gives you an idea of how to time out when you're planting and where in your garden. So, of course, I start out. Now, this is my old seed starting example before I came up with my seed starting cart. But I start germinate a lot of my own seeds and then get them ready to plant out in the garden. And the way that I know how to do that is I use some of the resources that we offer from Virginia Tech, which I will share with you at the end of this. It helps you time out those plantings and make sure that you're starting things at the right time. The other thing that you can do is something that I referenced at the beginning. You can use some techniques to make floating row covers. I covered 2 of my beds when I need to provide that protection, and I use PVC pipes I create domes with, and then use horticultural fabric over the top of it. It's white, gauzy-like fabric that goes over it. It's permeable to light. It's permeable to water and air, but it helps hold in the heat around there. And depending on the thickness of it and the permeability, it can provide you from 1 to 4 degrees of protection against freezing temperatures. It certainly isn't going to protect anything down around 25 degrees. It's going to defeat it. But if it just dips down to 30 degrees, the right kind of horticultural fabric, in this case, will really help with your system. Let's see. And so these are the kind of results I get. I love my raspberry plants. I love going out and picking raspberries off of the vines. It is they're so much fresher than what you get in the store, or the sugar snap peas, or maybe it's the gourds or the peppers or the cucumbers or the tomatoes that I get in. These are all harvested right out of my garden. Maybe it's the sweet potatoes. I love growing sweet potatoes. That's an excellent crop to grow around here. So I get all sorts of stuff like that out here. And it's easy. It's really, really easy once you dial in the right techniques with this. So I told you at the beginning that I was going to talk about why gardens fail. I was going to tell you that I was going to show you solutions to all of these things. A lot of things about these solutions I've given you takes care of that, because weeds. Yes, I told you how to identify the weeds, but here's the deal. I weed in my garden in April and May. After that, I don't weed anymore. I don't have to weed. Why? Because the plants have grown up. They're dominating that space, and the weeds don't have the sunlight to grow up and germinate there. So I do have to weed at first, but not after that. Before, I was always weeding in my gardens all the time. But I controlled the soil, so I know I don't have weed seeds in the soil. And then I control the plants and where they are, so I know where the plants are, and I know where the weeds are coming up and how to identify them. I showed you how to control your water, give the right amount of water to the plants, how to control it getting overgrown by going up, how to keep mildew and diseases and pests at bay by using vertical gardening techniques and things like that. And most of these things are fairly inexpensive. They're all very effective and pretty simple once you get them in place. It requires work up front, and then after that, you're kind of coasting along on the work that you put in up front. When you have that excitement, when you are excited in the spring, you put that work in. Now, this is what my garden looks like today. This actually was last year when I took these. My garlic going crazy. My peppers just going in. This is right after I planted it out, and it was getting ready to go. On the right, you can see an example of one of my pollinator beds that I put in, the top right, with actually catnip growing there. That's the biggest green mass that you see there. Catnip is a fantastic pollinator plant, anti-mosquito plant, and of course, it makes my cats completely stoned with happiness. So that's great. And I haven't talked that much about my pollinator gardens, but that's kind of a second presentation on my planting for pollinators. And so this is what it's going to be looking like here in the next little bit. If you want to know more about this stuff, there's a lot of resources that we have. Remember, the Virginia Cooperative Extension is a way for the land-grant universities to take the scientific knowledge that they develop and promulgate that out to the public, whether that is our farmers, whether that's home gardeners, whether that's just homeowners, whether that's people living in apartments. And so we have a lot of different publications that we put out there to help you with that process. The best one to go with is a web resource is resources.ext.vt.edu, resources from the extension at Virginia Tech Education. That's kind of how I remember it. But on there are 5 specific ones that relate to what we're doing, what I talked about today, that might really help you out. If you use the QR codes that are across here, you can just use your phone's camera app to take a picture of those, and those will bring up those web pages. If you just Google Virginia Cooperative Extension and those and the titles on there, it'll come up with it as well. Or if you go to resources.ext.vt.edu, you can type in any of that stuff and you can do a search result right on there. Lots of good resources that are there that can really help you out with what to plant, when to plant it, how much to water it, what kind of soil, how to fertilize, things along those lines. So these are excellent ways that you can get that. And if you ever try this or forget this or have more questions, you can always contact our help desk at the Cooperative Extension, which is 890-4940. So there's all sorts of ways for you to get in touch with us. And that's kind of what I had to talk to you about. I do have time for questions. Probably easiest if you put them into the chat, and then Susan can moderate that and send them out. So please ask away with questions, because I've been, usually I'm used to give and take when I'm giving this in person. I don't get to do that here. It's more me just talking. So I want to hear what you have to say.
Nathan, somebody made a suggestion for a short video demo for some people who are visual learners. Didn't you do one maybe last year or something?
I did, actually. That is on our Facebook page, and I will repost that to the Facebook page. If you, all of my videos that I've created are under my Facebook. I have a separate Facebook, on YouTube, on my YouTube profile under my apiary. So if you were to search for Bee Haven, like BEE space Haven, farm and apiary. If you were to search for that on YouTube, you would see a little hexagonal symbol with a bee inside of it. That's my YouTube channel. And if you go on there and look at the videos, I have a video that I shot in my garden last year when we couldn't do these, about gardening in small spaces and intensive gardening. So that's available. And I will also repost that on the Facebook page on the Facebook group for York-Poquoson Master Gardeners.
Okay. Before I forget, somebody is actually, I'm going to combine these two. So somebody asked earlier, is there a plant I could plant to be a deer deterrent because I have so many in the backyard, or is it just fencing? And then, and here's the one you are probably expecting, I have so many squirrels. Are they likely to cause problems? I can answer that. Yes.
Okay. So it's important when we talk about the second question to use the scientifically accurate names for them. They are monster squirrels. They're horrible, evil squirrels. Either one of those are scientifically accurate terms. No, they're bad. So how can you keep squirrels out of your garden? Well, my squirrels love coming up to my tomatoes when they're green before they're completely ripe. And they love taking a bite out of them, figuring out that they're not ripe enough, and then leaving it right there on my fence to taunt me. And then they take off. Maybe they take a bite of a second one because they figured the first one might not have been an accurate sample. and they'll leave both of them right there to taunt me, and then they take off and do that. What the squirrels are really looking for mostly when they're doing that is water. So the way that you get out of that is you provide them a water source that away from your garden that they can go to instead of going to your tomatoes for the water that they're or the juices that they're seeking there. To keep deer out of your garden, you have a couple of different options for that. 16-foot tall fences work very well for keeping deer out of your garden. That being said, I don't know too many of us who who want to do 16-foot tall fences. I have about a 4-foot tall, 3 to 4 foot tall fence that goes around my entire backyard, and I have dogs in my backyard, which means that deer don't like coming to my backyard. I live right next to the woods. I have tons of deer all over the neighborhood. They don't come in my backyard because I have dogs. But then again, deer like deer. You might not have dogs. You might not want to have dogs in your yard. So how else could you do it? Deer are going to be able to jump over pretty much any fence unless it goes up to 16 feet. So there are two ways that you can avoid that. One effective way that I have seen is deer don't like jumping over something where they can't see where they're going to land or where their landing is going to be obstructed. Right? So some people I have seen very effectively put up 5 or 6 foot tall fences with about a 3 or 4 foot walkway in between them. That doesn't allow the deer enough room to jump over it and have enough room to land without going into the other fence. They call it the boing boing fence, right? They can't jump over that and have a clear landing area, so they're not going to land there. Even if the deer do get into my backyard, by the time my plants have grown up to be able to be palatable to them, let me go back here and show you. I've got this small 3 foot tall fence that goes around mine. Once this has grown up and it gets into the summertime, and let me back up here so you can see what that looks like in the middle of the summertime. When it gets like this, even if they did come into my backyard, there's not room for them to land when they jump over that fence. They're going to be running into everything and they're not going to do it. So having it so there's barriers there to them helps. Having a dog helps. The last technique that I have heard that I have seen work really well are motion activated sprinklers. That will scare away the deer like anything. So putting one of the oscillating sprinklers and putting it and getting a motion activated one can really help deter the deer from coming out after your plants, whether they're in your garden or in your front yard. All right, what else?
And Brian, I had, not this past, but the summer before, I had the same heartbreaker squirrels out for my beautiful, huge Cherokee purple tomatoes. They made me so angry. They'd be out in our neighbor's yard. It was horrible. This past year, I only planted small bite size, and I didn't have to feel as angry because there were so many tomatoes. I guess I felt like we could all share. So they weren't taunting me quite as much. And yes, rabbits are going to be there too, all of that stuff. Yeah, I see somebody just said something about groundhogs and rabbits. Yep, everything wants to eat. And again, if you have an abundance of something, then you just kind of share. So somebody said, how about if I just want ready-made soil? Is there something different between raised fed soil and ground soil?
Yeah, so you will see products sold as garden soil in bags. You will see it sold from big centers. I just had a discussion with a friend of mine who had put in the effort last year to build a raised bed. He went to a leading garden center here in York County, and he got there a yard in his pickup truck of garden soil in the back there, and he planted that in his raised bed, and he said not a single thing would grow in there. And then he took it out of there and put it out in his yard and was going to replace what he put in there, and he just put it out in the yard to fill in an area, and still nothing is growing in that. So yes, you could do that. My recommendation would be, if you want only for a small area, get a bag of compost, get a bag of vermiculite, get a bag of peat moss, mix it up yourself. That way you know that you have the right mix for what's there. I don't know, because I haven't looked at every garden soil that's being marketed that way, whether they have the right mix or whether it's going to work well. But I do know that if you get good compost and mix it up with the peat moss and the vermiculite, you're going to have good results.
And maybe go in with a neighbor if the big bag of vermiculite seems like too much. And I know when I was reading the book that I used, The Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew, he says put a tarp out and measure it. And I was like, that's not going to happen. But I just kind of eyeballed, and we kind of dumped in a third of the compost, and then we dumped a third of the other two, and then just kind of mixed it with our hands, which was actually warm and fun. But that worked too. So yeah.
A picture of the book. So if you can see in the little thumbnail, my square, and this is the book that I would highly recommend. I'm getting all sorts of calls. And yes, here's the other thing about compost. So say you're only doing a bed, and you say, well, yeah, but I don't need a yard of compost. Compost is about the best fertilizer that you can use for your garden at all. I don't use anymore. I used to. I don't use any of the mass marketed fertilizers that promise you miracle-like results in your garden. I use compost because I'm feeding the soil. I'm not feeding the plants, and I'm feeding it with compounds that are going to release over a long period of time and keep my plants healthy. For that reason, I can take that compost, and every year this time, in fact, this next week, I'm going to go and get a yard of compost. I'm going to top dress all of my beds and get, every year I take organic matter out of those beds when I harvest things. I put a little bit of compost back in them to bring them back up to the level and put that organic matter back in. But then I take the rest of that and I put it around under the drip lines around my trees and bushes in my yard, and it does a job of fertilizing them as well. So, and that's the fertilizer that they need. They don't need anything else. I don't put it in a mound right around the central trunk of the plant, because that's not going to be helpful for it. I spread it around underneath the drip line. That means underneath the branches, close to the plant, and I let it absorb into the soil that way. There's always a use for compost. There's always a way that you can use it. And you can usually get a lot of the garden supply centers around here to deliver it for a fee to your house or your home, and then spread it out from there if you don't have a pickup truck. What else?
And Brian was asking if the compost from the yard waste recycle center is okay, and it absolutely is. I will tell you, Brent and Becky's bulb company that's up in Gloucester, he uses that for their gardens, and I feel like if Brent uses it, it's a-okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Local supplier for bulk vermiculite and peat. I would say
Peninsula Hardwood Mulch carries it. Ace Hardware carries it. I know that
Green Planters in Gloucester.
I don't know in Gloucester.
Green Planters.
Oh, Green Planters. Okay. Yeah.
Right over the bridge. And I think I can speak for Nate too. We both prefer the coarse vermiculite instead of the fine, because the whole point of it is to create air pockets and looseness in your soil, and that little tiny grain, to me, it just doesn't do the same thing. And that's harder to find, I think.
Yes. Yeah, but you can order it. So now is the time to go to one of those companies and say, hey, can I order some from you?
Yep. And you can get compost from Peninsula Hardwood Mulch it has a variety of substances in there, which is always great for some diversity in the compost. It's a little bit pricier, but you can get it in bags, which for some of you that might help with the manageability of it or whatever. Okay, we have in the same kind of vein, phosphorus source, because she doesn't like to use bone meal. Do you have a suggestion?
Good phosphorus source. I don't have a suggestion for you off the top of my head, but I can get back to you. If you put your contact information, send us your contact information, I can try and get you an answer for that.
And then how about some parts list for the irrigation supplies?
So you will, so the place I go, the online place that I go that I get most of my supplies from has a very good tutorial on how they lay that out. I would really defer to them. I like dripdepot.com. They are not the only reseller that does that, so I'm not endorsing them, but dripdepot.com is where I go, and that's where I shop. And they have some beginner kits on there. I'm not sure I would get the beginner kits. I would look at what they include in that, and then give and take. Like I said, I'm a huge believer in the variable emitters because I can change those without having to pull off the emitter and put a new one on there. That's a bit of a pain and a little bit of stress on the equipment. So I like the variable drip emitters, but you're going to need the 1/2 inch to go around to carry large volumes of water around your raised beds, and then either take a direct emitter off of that 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch tubing off to another square on your raised bed to put an emitter on that. And you'll see all of that. The 1/2 inch is the larger tube. Let me see if I can go forward to that, my screen here. So the 1/2 inch is the larger tube here. The variable drip emitters is where you can see my arrow right there. It's a variable drip. The 1/4 inch tubing is this tubing here. And then of course you have to get these to a source. I have some friends, if you remember the hexagonal beds, I developed a drip system for that. They don't have in-ground sprinklers in their house. So we took it off of a hose bib. We used a timer similar to this timer right here. Wasn't this brand, but we used a timer very similar to that. Came off of a hose bib, and then we ran it with PVC under the ground until it got to the bed. I came up off of the PVC pipe, had an adapter right there that they sell at that site that I talked to you about before. And that adapter took it from PVC to the 1/2 inch tubing that you have here. And I run that around the garden like that. Maybe that was too much information or too little. Help me out.
No, I mean, he did seem like he wanted a parts list. So that sounds like he's ready to go. So that sounds, yeah, he said perfect info.
Okay. What else?
I think that is the last question. I was able to answer some of the questions earlier on, and I think people have already decided to order or go to the library to get Mel's book too.
Okay, so here's another thing that I want to put in a plug with this. A friend of mine told me about this book about 7-8 years ago now. And she said, hey, you got to take a look at this. It'll change the way you garden. And I thought, I've heard that about a lot of things. So I got back and I went to the York County Public Library and I checked it out of the library. And then I renewed it because I was using it a lot. And then I renewed it again. Then they wouldn't let me renew it again. So I went and took it back. The week after that, I went back and checked it out again. After that, I started thinking, I want to dog ear parts of this. And they don't like it when I do that with library books. So I ended up buying it. Okay. And like most gardeners, I'm kind of thrifty, which is a nice way of saying cheap. And I don't like spending money where I don't have to. This is money well spent.
Good. That's exactly the story I said. And then you told me about it. I did the same thing. And then I ended up buying it. Somebody said that they found it for $10 at Walmart. I can tell you it's also $10 on Amazon. Not that I'm saying Amazon or Walmart is the place to go, but
There are lots of different places to get it, but it's there are certain things that it's worth spending your money on, and there's other areas not to spend your money, and this is one of the areas that spend your money on.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It really is.
What other questions can I answer for anyone?
That's it. I did put in the chat quite a bit of time ago, just a plug for the New Horizons group. So New Horizons is the regional technical program, and there is a carpentry group there, or class, and they can actually make raised beds for you if you tell them, measurement, what kind of things you want. They can build them for you, all kinds of other things. They can make you trellises and all kinds of stuff like that. And they will just charge you the cost of the materials plus 10% for their scholarships. And so I did put, and Corey just reposted it. So what I did was I went to the Poquoson Learning Garden and saw what I wanted. And then I called Tim and told him what my measurements were. And that's how I got my raised beds done. So they're wonderful. I actually have on the edges of mine some composite wood, so it doesn't decay. And you can kind of sit on it or stand on it. I have to stand on it because I'm short. So yeah, in that middle one. That's it. Just some thank yous from people, and I don't see any other questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for coming. If you do have more questions, you've got the number 890-4940 for the help desk at the extension office Monday through Friday, or you can usually post a question on the Facebook group, and someone will probably answer it on there, or send me a message on Facebook. I'm happy to answer those as well. And thanks for coming.